Awesome. All right. So where we're at is we're right in the middle of the chapter working with others, which is devoted to step 12. And we're on page 96. And where we're going to pick up is on the very last paragraph, bottom paragraph of page 96, where it says he may be broken homeless. And what we've done, just in case those who weren't here, what we've done is we've covered sort of the information on how we find a potential prospect or potential sponsee, somebody to work with. Then how do we lay down the foundation or the information for step one? And then how do we lay down the information for what our solution is, which is a spiritual awakening, or the information for step two? And how do we lay down the information for their third step decision? Another way to say that is, how do we let them know what our program of action is? And we described and discussed how we can do that and how we can do that quite quickly. And then that second visit to the potential sponsee where we actually dive in. So where we're picking up is in this exciting part of working with others, where we see that for those of us who have recovered, we get to live this life of service, but we're being I don't want to say hampered because that's not the right word, but we're being warned against codependency. And I'm sure I'm the only little codependent drunk in this Zoom room that has ever wanted to go around and put on the cape and save everyone and fix all their problems with my magic fairy wand, which I don't have, but I think I need. Uh, and I'm sure I'm the only one that relates to that. And that you guys are like, ew, gross, who would do that? Me. And so the book is sort of going to be explaining we have to be of service, we have to give to others, but how do we do it in a way that does not create false dependencies, that isn't codependent? How do we be effective? And that's what we're diving into. So it says he may be broke and homeless. I've been there, you know. If he is, you might try to help him about getting a job, or you may, or give him a little financial assistance. Now, I want to put this right in context. We've started working with this guy. Like, this is not a brand new car. Like, what I'm trying to say is don't lend sponsees money. That's just a poor practice. You know what I mean? Especially when they got their plans. You know, when you're working with somebody, they're like, no, Paige, listen, I've got plans. Dear Lord, do not give them money. uh, but what it's important to keep this chapter and the history of this chapter in context. This book came out in the very late 1930s, 1939. There weren't a lot of the social safety nets that are in place today. And so really, there might be that need to help them find employment or housing or those sorts of things. So it says, but you should not deprive your family or creditors of money they should have. We don't cover the traditions in this study, but it warns of that in the traditions. Bill Wilson speaks about in tradition 7 about how, he would spend a lot of money to help a prized sponsee who kept relapsing, but was a little stingy with putting stuff in the 7th. So what it's warning against is some of that ego feeding proposition. You know what I mean? I want to help this sponsee, give them some money so I feel good about myself. Instead of making my financial amends, I'm sure nobody here has ever avoided making financial amends. I know, wild. You guys would never. All right. And it says, perhaps you will want to take the man into your home for a few days. And keep in mind, there's no social safety nets. It's hard to get alcoholics into hospitals to detox. There aren't necessarily easy detox facilities like we might have today. So that was a common practice. Bill regularly had drunks staying with him. Most of the drunks that stayed with him didn't stay sober, which is just an interesting thing. But it does say, but be sure you use discretion. So we want to use discretion, and discretion is like a word that I like to use, which is discernment, which is to use our judgment without being judgmental. Is this a good idea? It says, be certain he will be welcomed by your family, that he is not trying to impose upon you for money, connections, or shelter. And this is an interesting line. It says, permit that, and you only harm him. We only harm him. And this is what we're getting into, this idea of creating false dependencies. See, if I go out and give you money, or if I go out and, come crash at my place for an indefinite period of time, It's creating that false dependency. And that's what we're going to really get into, is that idea where they are reliant on me instead of reliant on God or a power greater than themselves. So it says, you will be making it possible for him to be insincere. You may be aiding in his destruction rather than in his recovery. And I can see that, like, when I have not been properly armed with facts about myself and I've gone into sponsoring, and of course I wasn't giving out money, don't have a lot of it to give out, but you know, I'd work with people, and I would take suggestions from my sponsor or sponsors at the time, like different sponsors I've had, and you know, I'd have them call me every day. No, so I wasn't giving them money, or I wasn't letting them stay with me, but they'd take me hostage on the phone for 2 hours, you know what I mean? Just to tell me about their problems. And that didn't help either of us. You know how I know? Because they call me the next day and take me hostage for 2 hours with the exact same problems. You know what I mean? And I'm not saying don't have them call, but what I learned to do is, if I got a sponsee, doesn't matter where they're at in the steps and they got a problem, let's throw some inventory at that. Let's pray together about that. You know what I mean? Let's take action with that. And that helps those phone calls to be more productive. In fact, in my mind, when I work with people, I'm like, if we have time to be on the phone, we have time to be in the book. Doesn't matter if we're doing it over video call or phone call, let's be in the book together. And then that time is productive. And they're getting the actual tools of these 12 steps that they need to be able to recover, and not me being the codependent superhero that wants to put out their fires for them, you know? And again, I'm sure I'm the only one. And so this is where we see a lot of non-dual thinking. And what I mean by non-dual is that idea where both things are true. So we don't want to create false dependencies, but we will go to great lengths to help each other. And so it says, never avoid these responsibilities. So if I can help, I've got to help. But be sure you are assuming the right thing, but be sure you are doing the right thing if you assume them. Helping others is the foundation stone of your recovery. And that is an important line. Sometimes we hear that. I know, but Rob, I have a feeling you just put in the chat the picture of all the stones, the cornerstone and the keystone. Oh, not yet. Sorry, got ahead of myself. I'm pretty good at catching what goes in the chat, but not always. So helping others is the foundation stone of your recovery. And sometimes I would hear in the rooms things like step 1, 2, 3 is our foundation, and fair enough. But what I truly believe is that all 12 steps are my foundation. If I do not have all 12 steps working in my life, I don't have a foundation, because when it says helping others is the foundation stone of my recovery, we are not talking about the codependent putting out their fires. We are talking about laying down this simple kit of spiritual tools at their feet. So my foundation is all 12 steps as a way of life. And that kind of helps reframe what I got to do. And it says a kindly act once in a while isn't enough. Oh man, I was kind of hoping it'd be enough. You know what I mean? And what's the thing I always say about sponsorship? It's got to be inconvenient. A little. It doesn't have to be all the way inconvenient, but it's got to be a little inconvenient. If I'm not at least a little inconvenienced, I don't got enough sponsees. You know what I'm saying? I need to be a little inconvenienced by them. And then it says you have to act the good Samaritan every day if need be. And what's an interesting thing is the story of the Good Samaritan is a story of there was a Jewish. It comes from the Bible. It's a biblical story. And we kind of nowadays use Good Samaritan to mean somebody that like just helps other people and has a natural flow. But in the original story, it was about, I believe, a Jewish man who was injured. And at that time, the Jews and the Samaritans were enemies. And none of his, fellow people had helped him. He was injured on the side of the road, and the people who were supposed to help him did not help him. But a Samaritan who was an enemy stopped to help him, and thus became the story of the Good Samaritan. But the takeaway for drunks and drug addicts and compulsive, whatever brings you to the story, is that idea that we are those who are the least likely to be able to help, and yet we are helping. And how cool is that? You know what I mean? You're telling me a drunk is gonna be helping other drunks? You're telling me this little crackhead's gonna be helping other little crackheads? They can be large, they can be big crackheads. You're telling me the most selfish, self-centered, egocentric people are out there helping others? That's what we're talking about. We're the people who are least likely to help, and yet here we are helping. And so we may have to act the Good Samaritan every day if need be. And we're going to dive into where it might be inconvenient. It may mean the loss of many nights' sleep. Yeah. Great interference with your pleasures. That doesn't mean you can't have hobbies. And for some reason, the only two hobbies I can think of is like crochet and windsurfing. At no point have I bothered Googling other hobbies. You can have hobbies. But man, we got to be working with others. And our hobbies might, I'm sure you guys don't know what it's like to binge watch anything on like a Netflix. And partway through a binge, you got a sponsee calling, and it's like, oh man, and you just want to do next episode, but you gotta take that call. That's what it's talking about. It may mean interruptions to your business. It may mean sharing your money, your home, counseling frantic wives and relatives. Innumerable means too many to count. Trips to police courts, sanitariums, hospitals, jails, and asylums. And when we think of sanitariums or asylums, we can think of rehabs, detoxes, sober living facilities. That's what we're talking about. Psych wards. And I want you to know, in my 14 or so years of sobriety, I have had too many to count trips to take people to detox, visit people at rehabs, work with sponsees that are in facilities. And I've gone to court a couple times. And I will say, I had a sponsee that was, she was dealing with some charges, and I had fun. I will say I had a fun time at court. I got to hang out for most of the day, and it was exciting. I'm like, oh, it's like Law and Order. Whee! She was a little more stressed out about things. I can understand why. And her case got called, and the judge, we had a bunch of us kind of going to support her, and the judge was like, so who's that? And they were saying, she's my sponsor. And the judge in front of everyone was like, oh, you're her sponsor? Tell me about a step. And so in that moment in the courtroom, I had to do a very quick share. Now, I thought it would be fun to do one on step 9, because the joke that the judge doesn't care what step you're on. If you're in front of the judge, you're on step 9, make that amends. But I didn't know if that humor would translate. And so I just explained step 1, because I thought that would be really helpful information for him to have. And then he was, kind of talking, oh, it's a lot of work you guys have. And thank goodness I don't have problems like that. And I remembered making an Al-Anon joke. I was like, oh, there's fellowship for that, which I should not have done because I'm in a court. But the Al-Anon joke landed. Anywho, focusing up, sometimes you might have to go to court. You probably won't be asked to do an impromptu share on a step, but if you are, it'll be fun. I'll rock and roll with it. And it says your telephone may jangle at any time of the day or night. Then that happens. Your wife may sometimes say she is neglected. Now that line in particular, we're going to see that line extrapolated upon in the chapter 2 Wives, and in the chapter The Family Afterwards, where it talks about how oftentimes our loved ones or spouses can feel a little bit of jealous about the time and attention we give to newcomers and working with sponsees, and how we can best navigate that. A drunk may smash the furniture in your home or burn a mattress. Bless nowadays, I have had that happen, but I wasn't in recovery. I might have had a hand in some of that. You may have to fight with him if he is violent. That, I will say experientially, that rarely happens. Sometimes you will have to call a doctor and administer sedatives under his direction. No, do not give your sponsees sedatives. You might have to call a doctor, but absolutely not. Do not give them sedatives. Another time you may have to send for the police or ambulance. And I've had to do that a number of times, call in welfare checks for people that are unwell. And it says occasionally you will have to meet these conditions. And it's just, the book is warning us that there is going to be, we're dealing with alcoholics or drug addicts or compulsive, whatever brings you to this study. It's not always easy. It's not always simple. And sometimes it's a little messy. You know what I mean? We're dealing with human beings who are suffering from a terrible, terrible, terrible illness. But I will say, we wouldn't do it You know what I mean? We as a people group are people who live like by one rule. It's like, if it feels good, do it. And then, when it comes to sponsoring, we're like, oh, I don't know. No, dive in, do it. It's as tough as those tough moments can be, or as wonderful as some of those wonderful moments are. All right. So it says, we seldom, which is to say rarely, allow an alcoholic to live in our homes for long at a time. It's not good for him and sometimes creates serious complications in a family. Again, we're warning about creating those false dependencies. I don't want my sponsee. I want to be dependable to my sponsee, right? I want to live with integrity and do as I say I'm going to do. And if we have a time booked, you better believe I'm going to be there. But I don't want them to be dependent upon me. Their reliance needs to be upon God, higher power, creator, spirit of the universe. And this is a beautiful little paragraph at the bottom of 97. And again, this is a beautiful little paragraph that we are going to expand upon in these later chapters. And it is a beautiful theme. So it says, though an alcoholic does not respond at once, there is no reason why you should neglect his family. You should continue to be friendly to him. Now, keep in mind, when we first started this chapter, we often were introduced to the alcoholic or the addict or whatever brings you to this study through the family. We met the family first. Now in 2024, we usually meet them first. So we don't often have those same connections with family. But here's the suggestion. The family should be offered your way of life. And I want to emphasize this is a way of life. And what the way of life is, for those that don't know, it is these 12 steps as a way of life. Should they accept and practice spiritual principles? And you guys know I'm a believer. The principles aren't for me these nebulous concepts. The principles are the tangible actions of the steps. So should the family accept and do this work, live this way of life, there is a much better chance that the head of the family will recover. And even though he continues to drink, the family will find life more bearable. And that's really the principles of Al-Anon. Truly, it's like, if I want to change somebody, I'm the one that needs to change. And I'm sure we all, like, true, I know I often make the joke, I'm the only one, but I'm sure we all have loved ones that are suffering with an illness that maybe is like ours, maybe is a little different than ours. And there are loved ones that we would give, man, I know what it's like to have loved ones that I would give absolutely anything to help. But maybe I'm too close and they can't hear me. And what we're picking up is a theme that we're going to see, which is if there is somebody that I want to help, and maybe they're not opening to listening to what I have to say, the best thing that I can do is to work this program in such a kick-ass way that the light of God shines through me and they cannot deny that a change has happened. You know what I mean? If there's anyone that I want to help, I need to be a demonstration. I need to have that light shine so bright they cannot deny the change. That is the best thing that I could possibly do. And of course, I can lay down the simple kit of spiritual tools I can offer, but if they're not interested, the best thing I can do is this work, this way of life. That is what carries the message. And that's what we're called to do. I just really love the theme that I'm not meant to lecture. I know, it's like, you're not meant to lecture, Paige, you talk for an hour. But my job is not to lecture or moralize or condemn. My job is to demonstrate the power of these steps, the power of a power greater than myself working in my life. That's what we're talking about. So for the type of alcoholic who is able and willing to recover, or willing to get well, is able and willing to get well, little charity in the ordinary sense of the word is needed or wanted. Now, we need help, but the help that we get is through the 12 steps. So it says, the men who cry for money and shelter before conquering alcohol are on the wrong track. Anyone here who's sponsored quite a bit, you know what it's like when you sit down with somebody, and man, it's the coolest thing when you can just tell that they're willing. You can tell that, the pain of their illness has cracked them open and they're willing. And you know how heartbreaking it is when that window closes and they start saying like, no, Paige, listen, what I need to do is I just really need to focus on the gym. Or, listen, I need to really focus on going to work or get my family back or all these things. And it's like, man, it makes sense why you'd think that. But if we have alcoholism, it's not going to work. And it, like, truly, we can look at our own experience. What are all the things that we tried to put? You want to go to Scott, you could go to the gym if you want. I won't keep you. I don't want to go to the gym. I always make that joke. My abs, and there was a time in my life, this is, I think, over 2 decades. Oh God, this is like, it's not recently, but there was a time in my life I had abs. I mean, I still have abs because the muscles are there, but you could see them. You know what I mean? I was chiseled. I was very much in shape. This is several lifetimes ago. But you know what? My abs did not ever lead to abstinence. You know what I mean? Couldn't keep me sober. You know, and we all know what that's like to try to put these things between us and the first drink or the first hoot or the first pill or the first whatever, trying to put these things between me and my illness, and it not work. Oh no, I got to figure out my housing. You know, I've been working with people who come out of treatment centers for many years. And, you know, my experience is they are always worried about their housing. And I've never had anyone who stayed sober that did not get into housing. You know what I mean? It's like, I've got to put this thing first. And here's the non-dual. Here's where both things are true. It's this. Yet we do go to great extremes to provide each other with these very things when such action is warranted. This may seem inconsistent, but we think it is not. So it's the difference between that person saying, listen, I can't do my 4th step until I get a job. Or no, I know I've got amends to make, but I just really need to focus on this blossoming new relationship. You know what I mean? They don't phrase it quite like that, but essentially that. I could give them what they wanted and it still wouldn't work. But when we're working with somebody who's doing the work and is actively going out, making their amends, doing the daily prayers, meditation, inventory, doing this thing, man, it's a different type of giving. You know what I mean? That's that non-dual where 2 things can be true. And one thing that is true in one situation is not true in the other. That's what we're talking about. So not black and white thinking with this. And so it says, it is not the matter of giving that is in question, but when and how to give. And that's what we're talking about. After they're taking the actions of the steps, that often makes the difference between failure and success. The minute we put our work on a service plane, the alcoholic commences to rely upon our assistance rather than upon God. And that's summarizing what we're saying. And when it says service plane, we're talking about, I am fixing you. And I'm going to give you all the things that you want. And then you're going to rely on me and validate me and like me and give me a sense of worth. I'm sure nobody's ever showed up to sponsorship like this. Just me. You know what I mean? Showing up like that, you're going to give me that sense of worth. And then it's not enough. It's not enough for them and it's not enough for me. And it does not help. It says he clamors for this or that, claiming he cannot master alcohol until his material needs are cared for. And this is my favorite sentence in the book. I'd say that with a number of sentences, but I think this one's fun. Nonsense. What a great sentence. Nonsense. Nonsense. I can't put that material stuff first. I can't. It says some of us have taken very hard knocks to learn this truth. Job or no job, wife or no wife. We simply do not stop drinking so long as we place dependence upon other people ahead of dependence upon God. That is what I need. This is a program that is all about God dependence. This is a God, it's not, you know that saying, it's not a self-help program. This is a God, higher power, creator, spirit of the universe. This is a God help program, and I then help others get connected. That's what we're talking about. And unless I'm doing that, man, I can't stay sober. And here's the thing, anyone here ever relapse when you had a job, right? Anyone here ever relapse when you were unemployed? Anyone ever relapse when you were in a relationship? Anyone ever relapse because she left you or he left you? Anyone ever relapse because he came back? You know what I mean? My sobriety is not contingent on any of those external factors. Anyone ever have a relapse when you had a lot of money come in the bank? Anyone ever relapse when you had no money in the bank? You know what I'm saying? All of those external things cannot keep me sober. My sobriety is contingent upon my relationship with God, and I build that relationship through the tangible actions of the 12 steps. And it goes on to say, now this is important stuff. Burn the idea into the consciousness of every man. And that's not like, hey, you should gently suggest. It's like burn it into their consciousness, like drive this home. That every man, and when we say man, we're saying humanity. So that means everyone here. I would hope it, like my hope is that it would burn into your consciousness that you, if you're here today, you're listening to this today, that you can get well, regardless of anyone, the only condition. So the only thing that is asked of any of us here today to get well is this: trust in God and clean house. That's all I got to do. And you might be like, oh, trust in God. That seems like a tall order. I don't know. It's like, fine, that's just clean house. Then you'll trust God after you clean the house. Just worry about house cleaning. Also, I want to be very clear. It is not a literal house cleaning. Don't go. I mean, if you feel like you got to do a deep clean in the kitchen, you do you. But that will not keep us sober. You know what I'm saying? So spiritual house cleaning, 4 through 9. That's what we're talking about. Keeping that going in 10, 11, and then helping others. That's what we're talking about. All right. Now the domestic problem. And I know it's like, what would this be in the book? Alcoholics? Newly sober? Struggling with relationships? Or not newly sober and struggling? You know what? So domestic problem. There may be divorced, separation, or just strained relationships. Anyone ever come to the Rooms of 12 step with any of those? Heck yeah. And this is important because I'm sure you guys have sponsored or will be sponsoring some people that are like, Paige, you don't understand. I just need to get my partner, my spouse, this relationship back. And then I take them to 98 and I'm like, okay, let's see. There's some conditions that got to be met before we even consider that. It says, when your prospect has made such reparations as he can to his family. The reparation is the amends. So we don't even need to consider trying to woo back the spouse until we have gone and made amends. That's what I need to do, make those amends. And has thoroughly explained to them the new principles. Again, the track I take is the principles are the tangible actions of all 12 steps by which he is living. Again, this is a way of life. What that means is I have to be doing all of this work as a part of my daily life. And if I don't have that foundation of all 12 steps, there's no point me trying to win them back. Do you know what I mean? I've got to make those amends and I've got to be living this way of life first. That is the order. And it said he should proceed to put those principles into action at home. That is, if he is lucky enough to have a home. And it's that idea, I don't know about you, I can't bring into my home or my family life nebulous concepts, but I can bring the tangible actions of that spirit of service, of that love and tolerance that happens as the result of my continued inventory, my ability to see where I've caused harm and set it right. That prayer, that meditation, that's that tangible actions. I bring them into the home. It does no convincing of anyone if I tell you how great something is, but I'm not actually doing it and living it. And it says, though his family be at fault in many respects. And I love that because that you can imagine an alcoholic reading this book by themselves and they're like, but my family is at fault in many respects. It's like, okay, though your family be at fault in many respects, you should not concentrate about that. Oh man, you're telling me I got to focus on me and not blaming others? Lame. He should concentrate on his own spiritual demonstration. That's what I'm called to do. Demonstrate. And a spiritual demonstration isn't the me flouncing around with that magic wand, which I would. It is demonstrating these practical steps in my life, these practical actions in my life. Does no good if I sprout off about love and tolerance on a lead share for 20 minutes and then come home and I'm a dink to everyone. You know what I mean? got to be living this. I need to demonstrate it. Argument and fault finding are to be avoided like the plague, which is to say, avoid at all costs. And listen, I know some of you guys are like married or in relationships, and you're like, oh, well, that is not easy. Yes, I can't do that on my own. I need inventory. I need prayer. I need meditation. I need to work with others so I can forget about me for a little bit. You know what I mean? And the book, meeting us where we're at, in many homes, this is a difficult thing to do. Yes. How did you know? But it must be done if any results are to be expected. Oh man, I got to do it anyways. And for those of you that know, one of like, if my sponsorship, what it sounds like a lot of times is, that's okay. Do it anyways. You know what I mean? I hear you. That's hard. Let's do it anyways. You know? All right. It says, if persisted in for a few months, the effect on a man's family is sure to be great. Now, that few months is the few months of me demonstrating all 12 steps as a way of life. It does not take long to get well. It doesn't even take a few months to work the steps. We can get well very quickly and demonstrate it consistently. But again, I've got to be demonstrating consistently. But the result of that is sure to be great. And that's good news. And this, it's a sneaky little promise. Just a sneaky little promise here. The most incompatible people discover they have a basis upon which they can meet. What a beautiful, sneaky little promise. And this is absolutely not a promise, this next sentence. It says, little by little, the family may. Doesn't say will, it may. We're going to let go of that expectation. But the family may see their own defects and admit them. And we're going to see in the chapter 2 wives, we're going to see in the family afterward, I've got to admit mine. And it is only when I admit mine do I create that atmosphere where they might be able to admit theirs and own theirs and amend theirs. It's unfair for me to expect people who do not have access to these tools, who do not have access to the 12 steps, to act as if they did. Most people in the world don't know how to make amends, don't know how to settle an argument, or maybe they do. Maybe there are normal people. In my view of the world is a little skewed because I hang out with delightful folk like us who don't have a clue how to make things right. I need a book and a sponsor and directions to tell me how to do it. But I've got to admit mine first. So little by little, the family may see their own defects and admit them. These can then be discussed in an atmosphere of helpfulness and friendliness. After they have seen tangible results. Again, that is my responsibility to demonstrate the tangible results of the 12 steps. Tangible results are bare minimum permanent sobriety. You know what I mean? Consistent sobriety. That is bare minimum tangible results. We're going to see a little bit more what those tangible results look like. It says, after they've seen tangible results, the family will perhaps want to go along, as in work the steps, live this way of life. That's what it's saying. These things will come to pass naturally and in good time. So we're not here to, shove the book down anyone's throat. Provided, however, that the alcoholic, so that's us, continues to demonstrate. There's that word again. I've got to demonstrate. It's not an intellectual idea. It's not a thought. It's not a belief. It is a way of life. I am demonstrating that I can be, so that he can be sober, considerate, and helpful, regardless of what anyone says or does. That is the ideal. That is, we were joking about progress, not perfection. And I always emphasize it's spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection. That to me sounds a lot closer to that ideal of spiritual perfection. You know what I mean? That's what I'm aiming for. That I can be sober, considerate, and helpful, regardless of what anyone says or does. And here's the book meeting us where we're at, because it's spiritual progress. Of course, we all fall much below the standard many times. Yeah. Wonderful. Thank goodness it's got that in there. But here it is. It says, but We must try to repair the damage immediately, lest we pay the penalty by spree. And that's a warning. And what are we pointing to? We're pointing to the continuation of these 12 steps as a way of life. But I've got to see where I've stepped on the toes of others, where I have failed to be considerate, helpful, and where I've caused harm, and make it right as quickly as possible. Because if I don't, I will relapse, nothing less than a spiritual awakening, and I will drink again. And I can't stay, just like I couldn't stay sober on one drink or one hoot or one pill. I can't stay sober on one awakening. I've got to continue to grow it. I love to visualize it like a literal channel, and I've got to keep that channel clear so that grace of God can continue to flow. And it can't flow when I'm pissed at somebody, or I'm doing that thing where I know I did wrong and I'm trying to justify it and defend, and I'm just trying to avoid that amends at all costs. I know I'm the only one. Can't feel serenity and self-centeredness in the same house. They don't live together. So it says, if there be divorce or separation, there should be no undue haste for the couple to get together. Now, if you're working with a sponsee and who's got a spouse, there will be haste. They won't listen. They're going to haste it up. They're just going to be quite hasty. And they're like, no, go back together. But we can advise, hey, no undue haste. Brakes on that. The man should be sure of his recovery. So those of us whose lives depend on working these 12 steps, we need to have all 12 steps. I cannot be sure of my recovery if I'm partway through the process. I need to have all 12 steps acting and working in this way of life. And it says the wife, the non-alcoholic, non-addict, should fully understand his new way of life. Again, it is a way of life. It's not a set and forget it thing. It's not something I do for 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, 9 years. It is how we live our lives. And it says if their old relationship is to be resumed, it must be on a better basis, since the former did not work. So the relationship, the ground of this relationship has to be based on a new foundation. 12 steps are a pretty good foundation upon which it could be built upon. And it says this means a new attitude and spirit all around. And oftentimes I point to sneaky descriptions of a spiritual awakening. We've seen that new attitude as a sneaky description of a spiritual awakening, a new spirit. It's a change. I need to have a radical change in how I show up to this relationship. And the other person likely will as well. Sometimes it is to the best interest of all concerned that the couple remain apart. Obviously, no rule can be laid down. Let the alcoholic continue his program day by day. And when we talk about one day at a time, there is, don't drink, but I can't white knuckle sobriety. You know what I mean? That one day at a time is not, don't drink, one day at a time. I'm happy to be sober. I'll take 24 and pass it on. I'm having no drink disorder. That doesn't work. Maybe it doesn't. The day by day or one day at a time talks about living these 12 steps one day at a time. Taking the daily actions of the 12 steps one day at a time, right? Continue his program day by day. This work day by day. And it says, when the time for living together has come, it will be apparent to both parties. And I cannot tell you how many times I'm like, it's not apparent. It's not apparent. And maybe I'm colorblind, or I'm not actually colorblind, but like in terms of living together situations, I must be, because they're like, no, girl, it's apparent. And off they go. Yeah. It's that idea. It's like when it's on a firm foundation, it'll be obvious to everyone except them, just experientially. All right. And I love this because this is calling back to some of the real themes that we've been talking about here tonight. It says, let no alcoholic say he cannot recover unless he has his family back. This just isn't so. In some cases, the wife will never come back for one reason or another. This is important. Remind the prospect that his recovery is not dependent upon people. It is dependent upon his relationship with God. That is important. Thank goodness my relation or my sobriety is not dependent on people, because people are human and fallible and will disappoint. My sobriety is dependent upon my relationship with God. And again, I love that word relationship, because what we're talking about is really like, we're talking about relationships. You know what I mean? And I always like to tie this in, that idea of like, hey, if you're married or in a partnership, or you got a spouse, or you're just dating somebody, that relationship takes consistent effort for it to work. Do you know what I mean? I've got to communicate every day. I've got to listen every day. We've got to take actions to clear away the miscommunication, the blockages between us. We've got to do things together. It is dependent on my relationship with God. Another way to say that, the actions that I take to build that connectivity. That's what we're talking about. And it's not dependent upon my idea of God, my thoughts of God, or my belief in God. It's based upon my relationship with God. And that's important. I really emphasize this whole deal is experiential. It's not intellectual. It's about what I experience. And you can only experience a relationship. Although I'm sure some of us have created whole relationships in our minds. Look at you being more healthy than me that haven't. But you know what I mean? It's about what I experience, which is related to what I do. And it says, we've seen men get well whose families have not returned at all. And we've seen others slip when the family comes back too soon. And it's one of the most heartbreaking things to work with parents who have children who are in care, custody, child welfare, child and family services. Because a common theme is, they'll do this work and they'll do it so they can get their kid back. And then their child comes back, and it's the most understandable and natural thing in the world to think that they've got to put their kid first. And what inevitably happens is that the erosions of the actions that allow them to live in a state of grace, and a relapse happens and the child is gone again. We've got to put this work first. But the kicker is, the thing that we don't see before we've done the work is, if I'm putting this work first, I'm showing up, I'm being the best parent freaking possible. I'm being the best family member to all of my family members, best spouse possible, the best employee possible. If I'm not, it's not like 12-step is over here, these areas of my life are over here, and I got to fixate on this. No, 12-step is how I live my life, and I bring that into every area of my life, and it allows me to be the person that I always wanted to be, but never could be, in every area of our life. Because if you're new or struggling and you're here and just like put the program first, it's like, man, but I want to be a good mother. I want to be a good father. I want to be a good parent. Or there's things I want to do. This lets us do that. And it says both, and man, this I will say genuinely one of my favorite paragraphs in the whole book, but I will say that a lot. So good. It's one of my favorite promises in working with others. It says, both you and the new man must walk day by day in the path of spiritual progress. So walking day by day, that this is a daily program of action, and that we're doing it. We're taking the action, and we're walking together. We're shoulder to shoulder upon this common journey. I'm not better than anyone because I might be further along the path. We're shoulder to shoulder. And I love that it is spiritual progress, because how often do we confuse the gifts of sobriety with sobriety? So the family, the job, the car, the money, and none of that can keep me sober. What matters is, how am I progressing spiritually? And it says, if you persist, which means I got to keep working at it. I'm not done. Remarkable things will happen. When we look back, we realize the things which came to us when we put ourselves in God's hands were better than anything we could have planned. And that is a powerful promise. Powerful promise. And if you're new here today or struggling here today, and you're like, how the heck do I put myself in God's hands? That is the purpose of the 12 steps. You'll remember, I believe page 28, where it's talking about what seemed at first a flimsy reed has proved to be the loving and powerful hand of God. I grab a hold of this thing that I don't think is going to work for me, that I think I'm the exception, and it's inventory page, meditation page. Are you out of your freaking mind? And I grab a hold of that. And as I take these actions I don't like, I don't believe in, I think could not work for me, that what feels like a flimsy reed turns into God's hands. And I get pulled to safety. And that's what I need to do. I need to put myself in God's hands. And that is the sole purpose of the 12 steps. And I want you to know my life does not look in any way how I thought it would. I didn't have the delusions that the abs were going to stay forever, though. that one I had a little bit of awareness. But my life does not look like how I thought it should. But the truth is, when I am truly in God's hands, my life is better than anything I could have planned. And truly, when I am in my hands, it is a dumpster fire. And nothing could have changed externally, by the way. You know what I'm saying? Nothing could be the exact same day, and I can take a beautiful sunny day and ruin it with my thoughts. But that's what's on offer. That's what's on offer. And it says, follow the dictates. And dictates, it's not, directions, commands. It's like, oh, girl, that sounds like rules. And we don't like rules. I often tell you how it's like somebody tells me to do something. I was speaking at a roundup in Lethbridge, was it 2 weeks ago? Just a couple weekends ago. And I had for a responsee that was like, hey, you gotta tell the buffalo story. And I'm like, I don't want to now. He told me I had to. I don't want to. There's something in me that's like, oh, don't tell me what to. I know I'm a spiritual giant. But we don't like that. What are we talking about? Dictates. We're talking about the steps. Follow these actions of the 12 steps. The dictates of a higher power, capital H, capital P, and you will presently live in a new and wonderful world, no matter what your present circumstances. And what is a theme that we have been reading and seeing? That my sobriety is not contingent upon anything going on outside of myself. My sobriety is contingent upon that relationship with God. And we have a promise in Fears on page 68. It talks about just to the extent that we do as we think God will have us, does he enable us to match calamity with serenity. And so there we can be filled with calamity and pain and suffering. And that is matched with a serenity that, at least for me, is clearly not my own. I am not naturally a calm and well-balanced person. That's not who I am. But that is what's on offer. Something far deeper and far more tangible than, just don't drink. I can't do just don't drink. What's on offer is peace and serenity and a profound way of life that provides joy beyond anything we could have ever imagined. Man, that's what's on offer. And sometimes, when you hear maybe your sponsor, how free you want to be. I didn't know. I hated that saying because I was like, I didn't know what was on offer. And I was scared of the actions I had to take. But we wouldn't do it if it didn't work. And what's on the other side is real, and it is freedom. And there is hope for those who are new and those who are suffering. So it says, when working with a man and his family, you should take care not to participate in their quarrels. That is less likely to happen nowadays. But keep in mind, if I met a potential sponsee through their family, the family would be in contact, and they'd be maybe a little bit of triangulation going on. Paige, do you know what your sponsee did? The sponsee's like, Paige, do you know what my family's doing? And here's the best thing that I could possibly ever offer. Not that happens to me at all. But a lot of times we'll have the sponsee or the person that's like, do you know what they're doing? And I'm like, wonderful. And I will say wonderful. A lot of times when people are bringing me their possible amends or their inventory, I'm like, wonderful. And there's something about how my brain works, but wonderful, because what are we going to do? We're going to do some inventory. I'm going to offer them the simple good of spiritual tools. So rather than like, yeah, your family sucks. Well, that sounds really painful. Yeah, I'll also say delightful a lot. That's what I got going on. It's delightful. It's wonderful. I often joke I'll have a sponsee. This is a metaphor. It's not real. But sponsee be like, I burnt down the orphanage. And I'll be like, wonderful. We can make an amends. But that's just how my brain works. I don't know. But that's what I do, is I offer the tangible actions. Man, I hear you. That sounds really hard. It sounds like you're in a lot of pain. That sounds like suffering. Let's take some actions. And the more that, and the action be an inventory a lot of times. And it says you may spoil your chance of being helpful if you do. And that's the thing, is I'm called to be helpful, not Captain Fix the Day, Save the Day, put on the cape. You know what I mean? Helpful. And it says, but urge upon a man's family that he's a very sick person and should be treated accordingly. You should warn against arousing resentment or jealousy. You should point out that his defects of character are not going to disappear overnight. Oh man, lame. But again, this is where we transition into this sort of non-dual thinking, where yes, we have deep and powerful and spectacular recoveries. The level of spiritual awakening that is on offer is not simply, educational variety. No, there's some real depth to what we can have here. And our defects can linger and do linger, and we're human. You know what I'm saying? That where both things are true. And it says, show them that he has entered upon a period of growth. See, growth cannot happen unless I'm continuing. I cannot continue to grow unless I'm continuing to work and take these actions. Ask them to remember when they are impatient the blessed fact of his sobriety. And that is a theme that we'll see in the later chapters of like, pick your battles, thank God they're sober, but it's important for us to remember when they're saying, oh, don't arouse resentment or jealousy, what that means is I need to, because I'm reading this book, this applies to me. I need to be aware of my resentment and my jealousy, and I need to get freedom from it. That's what I need to be aware of. So it says, if you have been successful in solving your own domestic problems, tell the newcomer's family how that was accomplished. In this way, you can set them on the right track without becoming critical of them. The story of how you and your wife settled your difficulties is worth any amount of criticism. And even though in this case, it is specifically talking about how to help your sponsees navigate relationships and domestic issues, it's a beautiful principle in sponsorship as well. I joke about how it's like, we'll argue about anything and everything, but we can't argue with what's in the book because it's based on experience, and we can't argue with our experience. And what do we have to offer our sponsees? Our experience. That's what we have to offer. Not just our experience with the illness, and I really always emphasize this, but also our experience with these 12 steps, with inventory, with prayer, with meditation, with using these tools, a simple kit of spiritual tools to navigate life's difficulties. And so that's what I do, is I offer my experience. And truly, if they're not necessarily like, open, like that's all I've got to offer. But also it's a reminder that my responsibility for those that are new, for those that are struggling, for those that are in pain, is my responsibility is to continue to do this work. So I have that experience to share. The more I take inventory, the more I'm better able to help you with inventory. The more I make my amends, the more I'm able to help you with yours. And again, that call that I'm called to be a demonstration, and that I can live my life as an example and share my experience with that. And that's a beautiful place to leave it, because the next paragraph is a beautiful transition into a different part of the book that we're going to talk about next week. And actually, if you're wondering, we got the cure for social anxiety in that part of the book next week. Ooh, I did a bit of a cliffhanger, like come back next week and we'll talk about that. Anywho, I'll stop the recording and we'll wrap up with a prayer. Thank you guys so much for coming.